Okay, so now that we've got the user interface built, we're going to start putting the code together. There's a number of import statements that we're going to need, and I tend to just import these from a file that I have saved. I'm going to mass import a whole lot of them, otherwise it takes me ages to type them, and then I'm going to explain to you what most of them are. Some of them you'll probably be quite familiar with, such as random, but just to start with the top. So I've got a few different ones here. I'm not actually going to need all of these right now, so I'm actually going to get rid of the ones that I know I'm not going to need, and I will talk through them another session. But this one is importing the system and the operating system. In fact, I don't actually need the operating system either, but I do need sys, and that just is going to allow the app to run. I'm also going to import PyQt5, but specifically I need Qt Core, Qt GUI, and of course the UIC, which is what allows us to pass the user interface file through. From those, I'm going to import everything, and I'm also going to import Qt widgets, which allows me to use all of my functionality. Then over here, I've specifically said the ones that I want. Now, assuming that you know what an import statement is, you can just close your ears for a few moments or just zone me out. But for those that don't, when we talk about importing, we're talking about Python files from the library and ones that we've downloaded and imported, which have their own set of functionality. So all of the PyQt5 functionality that has been coded by the creators of PyQt5 is sitting in files in our library, and we are just accessing what is inside of those. I'm not going to import all from Qt widgets because there are a lot of widgets, and therefore it actually just takes a little bit longer to load up. On this scale, it's nanoseconds, but of course, thinking long term, you've got to consider whether you need all of the functionality from within a Python library file, or whether actually you just want to be selective on what you choose so that you don't take up additional memory and processing power unnecessarily. Okay, so from there, we can actually start putting our code together. So the first thing I want to do is I want to be able to reference my user interface files, which we called home screen and I believe info out. I will check that though, just to make sure. So what I need to start by doing is I need to just create two variables which are going to hold this information. So I'm going to call these win home. Again, make sure that you're using sensible naming conventions. And then I'm going to use the UIC module, and I'm going to use the method load UI type. This is going to allow me then to actually pass through my user interface screen file, which I believe is called home screen.ui, lowercase ui, make sure that I get that in there. And then I'm just going to put this on here, which just basically says that it's going to pull out the first set of data. That is our UI file. Not entirely sure why that is so necessary, but it seems to be the case either way. And then I'm going to do win out, and I'm going to set this to UIC.load UI type. Another thing I like about Sublime is that, of course, as you can see, it likes to give me the rest of the information, which I'm a big fan of and saves me a bit of time. And I'm going to do the same here with my square brackets. Okay, obviously I need to start building my classes, but before I do that, I'm just going to put a bit of information at the bottom that's going to be quite important. And that is that I need to actually create the app. So the way I do this is I call create app.qt widgets, and then it's going to be the Q application, which we can see up here. And we're just going to pass through the system and argv, okay? And then the next thing that I need to do is just put win main. In fact, no, we'll just do app.exec. There we go. I'll go back to what I was about to say in a moment, because actually I'm going to build my class first. Okay, lovely. Now, of course, I have two windows, which means I need a minimum of two classes. I'm actually going to create three because I'm going to be using a user as an individual to work through my program, and I feel that they need to have their own object within my code. I think it's really important when you're building with PyQt5 that you remember this is an object-oriented approach, but actually it doesn't mean that you just limit it to the use of the screens. You can create other objects which are relevant within it as well. So in order to create this, we're going to make sure that we have an uppercase letter for our naming convention for a class. We're going to call it home screen. And then we're just going to pass through Qt widgets.q main window, which is going to basically pull through all of the functionality that comes with the Q main window. So this is really important. So Qt widgets.q main window. I haven't used it before, so it's not actually coming up as a one that I've used. And then I need to pass through my win home, which is this UI file. So essentially, if we think about the way a class is set up, is we normally pass through Normally we don't have to pass anything through this first bit, but this is just basically saying this is what I need to inherit from, which is the functionality from Q main window. And also I need you to inherit all of the information out of Win Home. And we're going to now set that up a little bit further. We still use our def because we still have things to set up. So we're going to define our init, our instantiate, we're going to instantiate it, and we're going to pass through self as always. And then we don't have any type of parent or any inheritance other than these ones up here. So we don't need to put anything in there. You can put parent equals none, but that's entirely up to you. And now we need to obviously set up the Qt main widgets. So this bit's quite important. Qt widgets.q main window. And then we are going to give that its own init. I'm going to pass through self and I'm going to pass through the parent, okay? And this basically is just saying that I need you to be set up and that I need you to get your information from Qt main window. Then next one that's really important is self.setupUI. UI. And again, this is going to get its functionality from Q main window. So this is still a method in its own right. Okay, and then that's going to be the same for every single screen. Obviously, we're just personalizing what we put through here based on the screen, but this is going to be the same concept every single time. What you do now need to do is you need to work with your attributes. So what makes my window a window? Well, things like the geometry and the objects that are on it, the widgets. Now, the geometry, the color, the size, all of that is contained within my UI file, and that is accessed through this load. So I don't actually need to put any additional information in, but I do need to specifically talk about what I want buttons and labels and pictures and images to do in the initializing part. So that's in that initial load of the screen. There may be things that only change once you press a button or you change something within the screen, and they therefore don't go in this part because this is when this code very first runs, this is how I would like you to look. And part of that is that I need to provide the functionality for the submit button, which I do by putting self.submit button clicked.connect, which obviously means when clicked, you are going to connect to, and we're going to create a method. So at the moment, I'm just going to write what the method is going to be called, and I'm going to put that in a moment. And of course, I'm going to do self.clear button. Now, this is where it becomes important with the naming convention. These are the names that I gave it in the UI file, and this allows it to know that when you mean that button is clicked, that this is the one we're talking about. If it doesn't have the right name, then it will, of course, come up and say that it can't be found. Now, we can see here that we've referenced these two methods, but we haven't actually built them yet. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to build those now. And we're going to do them in the same way that we would do anything else. So we're going to do submit input. We're going to pass self through, and that just allows it to pass through any information from the file itself. And then I'm just for the moment going to click pass. We're going to come back to that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is do my clear form. Okay, again, really important that these have the same name as they are up here, because this is saying when my submit button is clicked on my user interface file, I want you to run the code that's in this method. So that's quite an important point to make. Okay. Next thing I want to do is before we go back and do things with these methods, I just want to set up our second class. And I just think that I quite like to do this, and I do make my students, is just create this shell of the code, and then they can actually go in and they can start to work on method one at a time. And I think this is a really important way to do it. When you actually build the shell, you suddenly have a lot of physical code, and that's what you're going to have. You're going to have more once you're done, but it does allow students, I find, to feel less overwhelmed at the task of then having to deal with each screen one-on-one. So I get them to create, as I call it, the shell, which is where they create all of the initial attributes for the class and the basic naming conventions for all of their methods, all their subroutines, and then they're able to come and actually deal with one at a time. So they'll come to this one, they'll write all the code that allows these two to run and work through it screen at a time. So we're going to do the same thing. So the next one that I, of course, need is my class info out. And again, uppercase letters. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start copying some of this stuff, which hopefully you will also be a fan of copy and paste, because why do it? Repeat it, and why hard code it when you don't need to. And this one is just going to be win out. So just checking that it's the same as this one here. Okay, and again, as I said, these next few lines are always going to be the same. And so I'm actually going to take this whole bit here. You'll also note that when I mention I get my students to do this, that actually this bit is a lot of copying and pasting. And actually I think that's important because you're now starting to feel like you're creating something, even though there's actually still quite a lot to do. It just gives that effect of actually, oh, okay, I can see this forming. So I've only got one button, if you remember, on this screen, which is my back button, and I'm going to make sure that I get this code set up. So that's going to be clicked, .connect, and self.back. So please go to my back method. It's always so much harder to type when you're recording yourself. Okay. What else do I need to do on here? I'm going to actually do a few things regarding the service. That's the back method. So I'm just going to put my back method in there. But there's actually quite a lot more code to deal with this particular screen because there was just more happening in the actual setup bit. But we're going to come back to that because I think it's important to just deal with this one screen first. And I'm going to come back to this. The last thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to create a user. And I think user classes are important when you're doing anything that involves a user because actually it's important to differentiate what is theirs and what belongs to the window specifically. If you think about the user, if you imagine this was real life and the user went into some sort of game scenario, they would wander physically from room to room, picking up objects and, carrying information, making decisions. It's the same concept with this type of concept. We are navigating through a program and application, and at any point we might change a piece of our information, such as our score or our current status. When we move into the next screen, we want to make sure that screen is aware of our new score and status. While you are able to pass these through, I think it gets good practice to actually use the convention of using a user class or similar types of classes to actually represent those objects, because this then goes right back in line with the whole concept of object-oriented programming. So while we're doing that, I'm going to say that I just want a couple of things. In fact, I don't need to set up with anything. And then I'm just going to say that I'm going to have a couple of things. I'm going to set this to a none type to start off with, and self.age is going to be a none type. It just means that there's nothing in there at the moment, okay? Lovely. So I don't actually need any methods for this user right now. I did initially, when I built this, actually have a get details subroutine method, but I didn't actually find that I ended up using it. So I'm just going to set this for the moment. I'm going to put it in there actually because I might find a use for it in a little bit. I might change the design of this slightly as I go along, but I'll just put pass in here. Okay. Before I go back now and actually do anything more in terms of adding code, I want to just think about the fact that what's the next logical step once we say this was, fully working. And before we go any further, and it's important to do this now because we're going to need it in our code, is I actually want to create instances of all my objects. So I've built my classes, my blueprint of my objects, and now I want to instantiate that with individual objects. So I'm just going to call it user one, or it could be current user. In fact, let's go for current user. And that is going to come from using the user class, and I don't have to pass anything through. I then have a couple of other things that are important. Now, I don't entirely know why. I probably should do some investigation, but it's important that you instantiate the window classes after this. And I think it has something to do with the fact that the functionality can't be applied to those class structures until this instruction has been read. Obviously, thinking about the way that code will be sequenced, it's going to run all of this code. It's then going to come back and check here before checking this code, okay? Because these are just classes and we might have some functions at some point. So I'm going to call this my main window is going to be my home screen, which I believe it is still called home screen in this program yet. And I'm going to talk through this in just 1 second. And win out is going to be info out. Okay. And we know how this works. We created an object. It's no different for our windows. I've created an object main window and it is coming from the home screen class. Okay. I then have win out, and this is coming from the info out class. And then when my program begins, I have 3 objects to work with, my 2 windows and my user that is navigating between those 2. And then what I'm also going to do now is I'm just going to call main window.show, which means that when I run my program, it starts with this screen. If I wanted it to start with a different screen, I would change the name here to win out, etc. Okay, now I want to go back to my code itself, and I'm going to look at how I'm going to build my submit. So if we look at this submit part here, what I now want to do is I actually want to say that I'm going to set my name and age based off the user input. So if we remember, our user in file had 2 line edits, which allowed us to put name and text, a name and age, sorry. And I'm going to say that actually the variable for my home screen class is going to come from that text. Now I'm going to give these slightly different names just so you can see the difference. And I'm just going to use the text method. And this is a method that is specific to the line edit, and it basically says get that text and now store it in this variable name text. And I'm going to do the same thing for age text, and I'm going to do self.agetxt.text. And this is actually another reason I tend to use txt, lbl, and btn, because it actually means that in my program I can create different versions of it. What I'm actually now going to do is I'm actually going to give current user, I'm going to update their attributes for name, and that's going to come from self.nameText. So I'm saying the current screen that I'm on, its version of name text, please store that in current user. And I'm going to go current user.age, and we're going to upload this so that it's self.ageText, ext. Okay. Last thing I'm going to do is I do just want an error message that basically just says that it's been recorded. Another way to do this would, of course, just be to create a simple print message. I'll actually put this in there just so using print in PyQt for testing is absolutely invaluable. So I could put just success in here, but I'm actually, and I'm going to just leave that in there just because I think it's handy to have it in there, but I'm actually going to show you how to create that little pop-up button that we had earlier on. And that comes from using the Qt widgets, Q message box. And this one, we then pass through the information. Now there's a number of arguments that need to be passed through, self being the first one. The first argument is what is the message what's the title of that box going to be? So I'm going to put success. And then actually what's the message going to be? So it's going to be name and age recorded. Okay. And then the last thing really is the button. So what you're going to be able to click. And I'm just going to put in OK for now. So what this means is a box is going to pop up and it's going to be titled success. It will say name and age recorded and have a button that says OK. Now, once that code's run, obviously I want to run and go to the next window. And the way I do this is I say self.hide, which means hide this screen that I'm currently on. My new window is going to be the object for the next window, which we just come down here, is called win out. I don't know why I'm a right click copy and paste, so you'll have to judge me for another time. I've just got a thing for it. I know I've got keyboard shortcuts, but I just never use them, and I never have done. I don't think I ever will. So dot show. Lovely. So we're nearly there with our first window. Last thing I just want to do now is I just want to make some changes to this clear form bit, which is going to be that basically I'm just going to clear the text. And I'm actually going to clear my current user's attributes as well. So just in case I do actually decide that I want to change it, I'm actually just going to set them to a blank string. Current user.age. Okay, and then I'm also going to actually change again. Now this time I want to make sure I call txt because I'm referring directly to the text box, the line edit that we called, and the clear method basically clears the contents of anything inside of that. Okay, so moving on to the next bit. We were looking at our info out screen, and earlier I sort of paused here and I said, actually, there's a few other things that I need to do. If we think about this logically, we're at the point now where if we run this screen, the user can do two things. They can put in their name and age, and they can either click submit or clear, and they could do that again. But essentially at some point they're going to click submit, or they're just going to be there forever clearing their name. And once they click submit, what happens? Well, what we've done is we've stored the name and age in the user object, and we now want to be able to populate this window with that information directly. We want that to happen on the load up, on that instantiation, and therefore it must go in the attributes. That's really important to understand. So I'm going to not type completely backwards. You'll quickly learn that I am dyslexic, which means that sometimes what comes out of my head is my fingers are totally different. I'm on a different planet. And once I do it once, it tends to take a few minutes to stop doing it, but it's fine. Current user dot name, and then I'm going to, that's really annoying, and then I'm going to go self dot age is going to be, well, so what I'm doing here is at the moment I'm creating a new string, a new variable that's going to hold the information from current user. And this obviously self means that it's related to this window. So this is a new string unique to this window, which is going to say your name is, I've concatenated it then with current user. And the reason I've concatenated it is because I want to store that as a complete new string. If I wanted to, I could just put a print in here to check that it had worked. And that means that I can now do the next bit. Now, if you remember, we had two labels and they were called name LBL label. Okay, and that's going to be so I'm going to call self.nameLabel.setText, and it's going to be self.name. And I'm going to say self.ageLabel.setText, and it's going to be self.age. So I'm going to I've already created my labels visually, but now I'm going to populate them with this text that comes from here. And then the other thing that I want to do is call my set image. Now, you're thinking, what image? We haven't talked about an image, but we're going to deal with that right now. And I wanted to come back to this because actually it can be a little bit complicated when there's lots of steps to cover. Of course, we still need to do the back button. That's going to take no time at all. But I'm going to create a set image method. And I'm going to call it from within my screen. So it's not going to be instantiated, the code, until I call it, which is not happening until here. And the way that I want to do this is I've saved a number of beautiful Pokemon images off of the internet, and I've made sure that I've saved them with sensible file names. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to store these in a list, or you could store it in a 1D array, depending on the programming language that you're using. And I'm just going to iterate through them and choose one at random, okay? Hopefully most people here have used the random function, but if you haven't, then I'm just going to explain. Earlier on, I imported random up here. Random allows us to generate random integers and items from a list. But what I actually want is to just randomly create an integer on this occasion, just because it's the easiest one for people to get their head around, and we'll look at using lists another time. And when I use the random.randint, randint is the method from within the random library, I need to make sure that I give it a start and an end point. So I might say a random integer between 0 and 2000, or a random integer between 35 and 64. That works, 35, 60, yeah. Okay, so 0 is going to be the start end. And then what I actually want to do is I'm going to pass through the length of my list Poke images and then -1. And the reason I'm going to do it -1 is because obviously the length of this 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is going to come back. The length is going to be 5, but my index positions are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my length is 5, but I only want to be able to access the index positions 0 to 4. So I just go -1 at the end there just to make sure that that happens. And then I'm going to set my image label. And this is the part where I said that it's really easy to use a label. We just use set pixmap, and that allows us to do that. One thing that I probably need to do, which I will do before I run this, is I need to go in and change it so that it scales the image, and you can do that within the user file. qt.pixmap, and then this here is just some string formatting. I'm not sure if people will know what this is, depending on what your level of programming is, but we will talk about that another time. But it basically just says that the string is going to come from some version of a string that I'm going to pass through. And the reason I do this is it then allows me to directly reference PyQt5.num. So if we imagine that the first time I run this, it generates me the number 2 out of my random integers of 0 to 4, then I'm going to come along and in terms of my images, let's make sure that we've got enough closed brackets, 1, 2, 1, 2. In terms of my images, it's going to say set the pix map to 0, 1. So if it came to 2, it'd be mrmime.jpg. And so that's just essentially passing this information into here. Okay. Obviously, if I wanted to hard code it, that'd be great, but that wouldn't be much use in terms of doing this. There's lots and lots of different formatting settings. It's entirely up to you to find the one that works for you. Okay, then the last thing that I just need to do is I actually just need to deal with my back button. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to do self.hide. I'm going to do self.new window is going to be equal to this home, which I believe it's called. We'll just double check this. No, it's actually called main window. So make sure we've given it the right name. Main window, not as a class, it's an object. And then we're going to go self.show, new window.show. Okay. So I think that is everything that we need. I don't know if we're missing anything, but I know that I need to scale that image, and I also need to actually move the files over from one program to another. So I'm going to actually just quickly do that in the background, just so that I can obviously make sure that my program is running. So I'm going to get my files that I need. I'm going to send this over to my projects, Pokemon. I'm going to paste this. Lovely. And I just need to check my file names now that I'm in here, because actually this one is called home page on this occasion. So this is really important. It's just not going to work otherwise. And this one is info output. So that's absolutely fine. But actually it's capital I. So again, that wouldn't have worked. That would have been very awkward. And oh, that's annoying. Let's actually just, it's very frustrating when it does this. Info output. And we're just going to finish this off. Okay, and our images are all in here, so hopefully this should work. However, we shall see. So, doesn't like my home page file. Okay, why? Because what am I missing on the end here? My .ui. And it's really frustrating that this has now decided it wants to delete everything, but hey, .ui. Lovely. Okay, sorry about that. Interesting. Let's see. Let's do some error checking then anyway. Parent is not defined. Oh, of course it isn't, because I decided not to put parent in there. So, sorry, you might have to go back and delete that out of your code if you also put that in there. Hopefully. And it doesn't like these being a none type either. Let's set these to nothing then. There's a few changes I've made to this as I've been going along. I think I'll stick to how I had it the first time next time, and then I won't have these issues. But hopefully, there we go. So let's see. So if we start by actually trying to test out a few different things on this, I'm going to start and see that it clears properly. Yep, it does. That's great. And now let's just actually see if this has worked. So name and age is recorded. And okay, as you can see, a few different issues here. So actually I'm going to address those by getting my user interface files back open, and then you'll be able to see exactly what the issue was. So if I bring my designer files over into this space here, then we'll be able to see that there's a few different changes that I need to make. One of them here is that my text labels are absolutely tiny, which means that they were never going to be able to fit all the space in. And the other one here is that I need to set my scale to the right size. So scaled contents, and I'm going to just click yes. Okay. Hopefully, if we come back over and I'm going to run my code again, then I should find that I shouldn't have any issues, but we shall see. Okay, so I actually realised that it wasn't showing the images, and I'm going to kind of insert this bit of video in, so sorry if it seems like I suddenly changed subjects, but there was just a bit of an issue that I noticed when I actually then was testing it, which you guys didn't see, and I actually didn't notice a second ago when I said earlier that it was the clear bit was working, and that's absolutely fine. And then I've remembered that I had the same issue the other day, and I've remembered why I had the same issue. So you will see that it's almost right, but actually I've not got my name and age here. Why is that? Okay, and this is to do with the fact that we have to think about the way the code is instantiated and initialized. If we look at our code here, if I was to, for example, I'm actually just going to close that one down. If I was, so we think about the way the code is set up. This code is all checked, if you like, before we actually launch the program, and it checks that there's no syntax errors and logical errors, and it gets to the bottom and it's fine. And what actually happens is the first time it runs, it actually loads info out, and it loads it with the current user dot name and the current user dot age. And that means that when I then navigate to this window after clicking submit, this is already preloaded and it doesn't load a second time because I've already instantiated my object at the bottom here. Now I am still going to, for the moment, just leave these in here. But actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a slight change. And instead of calling the object when on these window navigations, I'm going to change it here. So where this was to go to the win out object, I actually want to go to just the info out, and I'm actually just going to call it as a class. And what this is going to mean is that it's going to create a new version of it, a temporary instantiation, which is actually fine for what we need it to do in this moment. That means that it doesn't have this information preloaded and it needs to go and get it. And when it does, it will go to current user and age, and it will look for it will have the more updated information as per the lines of code above. So just wanted to be clear about why we do that. And for the same one for this one, so this is actually going to go back to our home screen window as opposed to an individual object. Now what we should find is that if I now build this and I put in my name, the whole internet knows how old I am now, and I click submit, it actually has passed the information through. And you also notice that it changed my Pokemon, which is nice because I like Eevee. So I'm just going to put this bit on the end because I think it's a really important bit to cover. Hopefully you can go back, make those changes, and you'll have a fully working Pokemon app. You can, of course, now change this, amend this. You might want to change it based on the input they put in, depends on the Pokemon that they get, add loads more Pokemon. I hope that this video has been useful. I have actually created a new website, which I'm just in the process of adding new stuff to. It's really need to work on my design. You'll soon realise that front-end design is absolutely not my thing, but there are some resources, including the source code for this Pokemon generator, which actually you're able to just download. I haven't quite finished my algorithm checker. I'll be working on this one, but this Premier League one, which I'm doing a video for next, also is in there. So hopefully I'm going to be adding more stuff as I go along. I've also really would like to shout out, I've put on my recommended courses a couple of people, Tech with Tim and Corey Schaefer, who I've mentioned before. Honestly, just some of the best YouTube tutorial videos that I've watched, and really helped me along the way. Just they give, great pedagogy. There's lots of working examples, and I just think that I really would highly recommend checking them out if you get a chance, because they have been invaluable to me learning, and I often recommend my students go and check out, particularly Corey Schaefer for the more complex stuff. He does great videos on the use of Django and Flask. I, of course, will be making similar videos, but with a more educational concept and, obviously slightly different focus, but I really, again, they're worth checking out. Anyways, I hope the video was useful, and keep your eye out for my next one.